Hi, I'm Marcus Bohr. Thank you for inviting me to speak about open source at Open Data Saves Lives, the Unconference. Unfortunately, I'm also speaking at another conference on pretty much the same topic today. So I've recorded my talk for you, and hopefully you'll enjoy the video version. Um, I've put some links to the slides, and I've also put some other things at the end of the presentation that you might be interested in. Okay, so open source for medicine. Open source is the only way for medicine. My name is Marcus Bohr. I'm a GP in Yorkshire. I'm a software developer, clinical informatician, and I spend a lot of time running discourse forums for health-related topics. I'm also a founder member of the Public Money Public Code Collective, which you might be interested in finding out more about. The link is clickable in these slides. I was previously an emergency physician and an anaesthetist in hospital, so I've got a range of sort of medical perspectives. And these slides are at that link there, that bit.ly Marcus Bohr -ODSL will get you to these slides, which are publicly available on GitHub. So open source is the only way for medicine, and this is something I firmly believe. This is a picture of an alchemist's workshop, I guess you could call it, from several hundred years ago. Now, alchemy was a precursor to science, but it didn't make an awful lot of progress, primarily for various different reasons, because they didn't share any of their progress. So they all kept their alchemical formulae secret because they were all worried that someone else would beat them to the end goal of alchemy, which was to develop the elixir of life kind of thing. Well, we know that that was a myth, but actually accidentally a lot of alchemy did produce scientific advances, but they weren't shared, so they didn't really take hold. It wasn't for another couple of hundred years until people started writing about their discoveries and sharing those pretty much openly within the scientific community. And then you start to get this building on the shoulders of giants phenomenon where people don't have to start from absolutely nothing in order to make a new discovery. So you can build on previous discoveries. And we've got a refinement here where journals are now becoming more popular and being used for medical things. I just love the terminology they've used here. This is, I can't remember the date on it, 1844, the American Journal of Insanity, which is incredible. And now we've got things like this, which is a much improved way of sharing data. We can now pretty much get any paper that you want. There are still some serious problems with academic publishing, mainly that it isn't as open as it should be, but things are getting more open. It's certainly easier to obtain the information if you go to there are sites that perhaps are illegal that can share this kind of information, which is interesting. But that has changed the way that we share information. So how does this apply to medicine? Well, I'm talking particularly about the software that's part of medicine. And it has become an intrinsic part of medicine. So you can't really separate now software from medicine. Maybe even a decade or two ago, the software that's being used in medicine was really simple admin systems for, tracking patient demographics and stuff. And so it was like a card index. It was nothing clever. But now we're at the situation where we're talking about decisions being made by software, decision support, alerting for physicians, even AI is being used in clinical care. And yet these things are not open. But the rest of medicine is open. All of medicine is openly published, peer-reviewed, verifiable, auditable. It's one of the central tenets of evidence-based medicine that you have to be able to verify that something is true and that it can be replicated by other researchers, and then it gradually becomes accepted as this treatment is beneficial to this condition, rather than these just being wild assertions. And yet in software, Software in medicine has been given a free pass, as far as I can see, to make wild assertions. It has no real evidence base, and a lot of it is increasingly dangerous, actually. Why else might you go for open source? Well, medicine is a hard problem. What I've seen many large monolithic services and systems fail to meet simple challenges. Work that I've recently done on Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health digital growth charts has taken 20 years to become something that can be digitized and put into a digital system. But the monolithic approach has not achieved that. It's the open source approach that has achieved that. Iterative development seems to work well for large, difficult things. The internet is a good example of that, and open source does iterative better than anything else, primarily because everybody can iterate on it rather than just the owners of the code. There is another thing about when hard problems exist. Is it really ethical to make many people solve those hard problems multiple times? An example would be, if it's hard to build a particular decision support system to support maybe choice of oncology treatment, should you allow one bunch of people to solve that problem once and put it into one electronic health record, a proprietary system, and then it be solved again using more brains and more brain power and more energy and, of course, more taxpayer funding usually, and all of that rework is ridiculous when you think that this problem has been solved. Can't we all use the same solution if we're absolutely certain that it's right? And of course, the more people you have working on the solution, the more certain you can be that it's right. So resolving a solved problem is a waste of time, money, and brains. This is comes from Eric S. Raymond, who's a kind of father of hacker culture, and he talks about no problem should ever have to be solved twice, which is kind of what I'm talking about. He's talking about software problems, but I'm talking about medical software problems. Creative brains are a valuable limited resource. They shouldn't be wasted on reinventing the wheel. It's your duty as a hacker, and in this case he's talking about hackers, not people who maliciously exploit systems, but hackers who tinker with systems and improve them, and the 1970s understanding of the word hacker. He's talking about a moral duty to share information, which of course we have in medicine. When it's a moral duty to share information for direct care of the patient, it's a moral duty to share a knowledge base and to teach other doctors. As you learn, you are also expected to pass that on. So it's got to be a moral duty to share the software, and open source is the way that we do that. Quality is something that is quite important when it comes to medical devices, because we want to know that they're safe, that they are secure, that they have been tested. And at the moment, we don't know any of those things. The Alchemist, who's got their private, proprietary, secret recipe for this software, they say it works, and that's as far as we've got. So when you buy a piece of software, it's asserted that any of the systems we use in the NHS are safe, but do we know that they're safe? Well, we only know what we've been told. We might find an error, and good luck to you if you find an error in a proprietary system trying to get that fix. I know from personal experience it's not easy. Coming on to that, improvements. If you have an open source piece of software and you've got the skills to improve it, you can. It doesn't mean that the owner of that software has to take your improvement, but it might just suit your needs to have a tweaked version. Not for everybody, but that is an option. If you want to improve it and you don't have the skills, you can hire someone to do it. If you improve it, it can be shared with the community, and it might even be adopted into the core project. And in return, you get everybody else's community developments. So that answers the question of, why should I pay for this extra feature to be added to the system, to my open source system? Well, if I've got 50 other NHS trusts using the same open source system, and we each build one feature, we all get 49 features for free and one feature that we had to pay for. Now that's incredible value for money, and you will not get that in any other model. So why aren't we doing open source? I have no idea. Clinicians not directly employed in software are more likely to contribute to an open source project than a closed source project. And I think this is because the ethos of medicine is very much around sharing knowledge. And so what we don't like is if we contribute into a project and then that project becomes proprietary. The question arises, well, how did my free NHS contribution of knowledge become your property to sell? Whereas with open source, you don't have that. Everybody benefits. It benefits the third world. It benefits developing countries. It's a completely global good. The NHS actually does understand this very well. So it has an intrinsically sharing philosophy. We share the risk of illness and we derive protection from that. So we all pool our resources into essentially a big global and very high value for money insurance policy. We share medical knowledge as well, and we go to we contribute to journals, we go to conferences, we talk and we share organizational knowledge with networks and forums and things like that. So the NHS kind of gets this already. Medicine gets it already. The internal market of the NHS does not get it, and that is one of the sticking points. NHS procurement does not get it, and I think a lot of NHS non-clinicians also don't get it, including some of the people who I think probably should be more open to open source in terms of, people who make decisions in medical IT. I think are often actually don't understand open source at all, which is quite sad. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about the Chamberlain forceps. This is an example of closed source medicine and how it backfires. So as medicine, we're an old profession and we've been round this house many times before. So medical software is doing it for the first time and we're in a position to advise them. The Chamberlain forceps were a pair of obstetric forceps and they were found in an abandoned house after being under the floorboards, I think it was, for about 150 years. And when they were found, it was apparent that these forceps had been in use several hundred years prior by this Chamberlain family who used to provide obstetric services to the rich and famous of Europe. And they kept the existence of the forceps secret. They would go into the house, blindfold the mother, send everyone else out of the room, deliver the baby if it was an obstructed labour, using obstetric forceps that really did look very much like modern Keelan's forceps. And they would put them back in the box. Everybody goes away happy, but they kept it secret. So during that 150-year period, when they kept these forceps secret, there was only a couple of pairs in existence which they owned. How many mothers and babies would have died through obstructed labour that could have been saved by the knowledge that these forceps could provide relief of that obstructed labour? Well, I would guess it would be in the tens or hundreds of thousands or maybe more, based on the population at the time. But whatever the numbers are, it's a crime against humanity to have a medical innovation and keep it secret. And if we extend that now back to software, the software is just a machine. It's just a way of programming a tool to do things. It's medicine. And if it's a medical innovation and you keep it secret, you're committing a crime against humanity. And I realise that's a kind of an extreme view, but I've brought you along the journey here. I think if there's any step in the journey that you would like to take issue with, I'll be in the Q&A at the end. Hopefully, get some good debate about this. Because, I like to challenge things. I like to shake things up a bit. But yeah, how can you defend an ethical stance of having something as groundbreaking as, say, an AI that can choose the right oncological treatment and keep that secret, proprietary, and charge top dollar for it? So I'm going to cover off some open source myths just because I find they're often things that get brought up. But open source is free, so it can't be commercialized. Well, that's just not true. Yes, you give away the code, but the services around that code, which people are going to need, are not necessarily free. So you might provide the software as a service because people don't necessarily all want to self-host this stuff. You might provide warranties and maintenance and support around that, further development, add-ons, plugins. If you look at the world of WordPress, which is an open source content management system that constitutes roughly 30% of the whole internet, that is an open source ecosystem. It's become a livelihood for hundreds of thousands of developers, and not all of them work for WordPress.com or WordPress.org. So it creates a big wide world where everybody can play. You can't make money with open source. Well, I just covered that off, really. Open source is for hackers and weirdos. I think the fact that Microsoft acquired GitHub, Microsoft have just currently produce possibly the most popular code editor, which is open source, called VS Code. And the big players, IBM, they are all moving into open source because they understand that the writing is on the wall. Anyone can change your code, so it must be insecure. Well, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how open source code is handled. So yes, other people can take a copy of your code and they can make modifications to that code, but they can't change your copy of the code, which is what you're running in production. You have the control of that. You also maintain a copyright over this code, so you don't lose control entirely. You still have copyright, and the open source license is what grants the rights to the users. So it's not the Wild West. It's actually a very well regulated and well understood community. Companies just won't make their software open. Well, we're the NHS. We're the big customer. If we demanded open source software, we'd get it, because we have suppliers who only supply the NHS. So if we say by 2029 your software must be fully open source, then they would have to comply with that or leave the market. So the reality is that open source is the age of reason brought to computing. It's a scientific method. It represents like a saved progress in the game as well. So if you build a project and the funding runs out with organization A, but it's all open source, well, organization B, C, and D can take up the mantle and they can run with it. As it is, if you had done that with a closed source project, the closed source project just dies when your funding runs out. So open source is a saved game. Like when you're playing a video game or something, and you can save your progress, you'll never have to go back and repeat those levels again. That is what open source is. It shares progress across the NHS. There's no other safe and scientific way to do medical computing. I would add to that, no other ethical way to do medical computing. And it's an opportunity, not a threat. You just need the right business model. The NHS is particularly well suited to this as well. And I'll leave you with one other slightly random thought, which is that we have a duty to collaborate and innovate and develop human progress, because we do not want to be still on Earth arguing and repeating the same problem solving between proprietary software and proprietary innovations whilst the Earth goes to rack and ruin. So this is an extreme example. The Earth will be swallowed by the sun at some point in its future. We have to be off the Earth as a race by then. We will not get that kind of progress if we don't just share the progress that we've already made. If we make people repeat progress and go backwards, that's a waste of brains. And for Earth annihilation, you could replace that with climate change. And actually, even more topically, you could replace it with coronavirus, because we all had to collaborate a lot more quickly just in the last 18 months, 2 years. So these are the kind of thoughts I want to leave you with. And if you make software or involved in software in any way, you want to be asking yourself, why is our software not open source? If you've enjoyed my talk, I will be around in the Q&A. I've put some links in here to these slides. So bit.ly/MarcusBohr-ODSL should get you these slides live on the internet, and you can then just play with them like I have. And the links all go to other blogs I've done. I've been involved in some podcasts and webinars and things like that. And you follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much.